Hi there and welcome to the briefing room. I'm ABC News political director Rick Klein. We have the whole team here, Tom Bossert, Mary Alice Parks, our troops at the White House in New York. It is a scary and sobering day here in Washington, in New York City, and around the country. A series of explosive devices have been sent to a series of officials. They are prominent former and current Democratic Party officials. CNN also involved in this. I want to go to our Pierre Thomas, who's been tracking the latest on this. What do we know so far on what links these devices and anything we might know about who might be behind them, Pierre?
Well, law enforcement sources are telling me that all these devices that are confirmed as, pipe bomb type devices also had a return address to Debbie Wasserman Schultz, the congresswoman. Law enforcement are obviously, because they have intact devices, are exploiting these devices. They're looking at, what kind of material might be used to explode. We have DC police and the NYPD confirming on the record that the material appears to be explosive. So these are potentially dangerous devices. These are not hoax devices. At least it's the preliminary assessment of law enforcement. Also, because they have the packages, they will use forensics. They will look to see if there are any fingerprints, obviously. They'll look for any kind of threads, fibers, if you will, anything that could be used to point to the direction of who the sender may or may not be.
And we want to turn now to the former chief of detectives of the NYPD, Robert Boyce, an ABC News consultant now. And Chief, I want to find out from you what goes on in an investigation like this. You have so many different crime scenes. You have so many different devices that are sent out. What can be done to try to bring the strings together to find out what the connections are and see what evidence all of these different devices can add up to?
Sure, coordination is an issue here because you have multiple agencies, but the overhead here is the FBI and the Joint Terrorist Task Force, and that's important to understand. They will coordinate all the resources. Clearly there's a link, and it's readily apparent when you see the packaging on the first four. The others after that, it's still emerging, it's still to be determined right now. But a very dangerous device. It's a very rudimentary device, but right now they'll figure the triggering device out, just how dangerous it was. Hopefully they'll be able to pull some forensics from those devices and link that to some person or persons.
And Chief, is there any sense that you'd have about why the devices did not explode? Several of them were delivered. We know that one was at a mailbox. We know that others were caught in processing facilities, but none of them actually exploded.
Sure. Well, we were very fortunate with that. The caretaker, Mr. Soros' estate, recognized it as something odd, put it in a wooded area, retreated and called the police. CNN, again, saw that it was, retreated and called the police. The other two devices, Clinton and President Obama, those were Secret Service persons who were involved in that early on. So you have professionalism there. So we were very fortunate yesterday and today that nothing happened with these devices.
All right, Chief Boyce, I know you've got to run over to our partners at WABC, and we'll be checking with you throughout the day. Thank you, Chief. I want to ask Tom Bossert, former Homeland Security official under the Trump administration, something like this happens, what activates at the federal government? We heard from the president earlier. He says there's a full federal response. What has to happen in a moment like this?
Yeah, a couple of things to remember here. First, this investigation really started on Tuesday, so we're hearing it now, and we're seeing a lot of the reporting because of the camera shots outside CNN headquarters. But the first package was received and identified by federal authorities, Secret Service, on Tuesday night. And so what's happened here is, as the chief said, a joint terrorism task force has been assigned to look at this. It's truly joint, federal authorities, local and state. The federal government really doesn't have to do much anymore. This is a pretty routine and reflexive response for the FBI and the Department of Justice to say, you field deployed agents have the authority to take something suspicious like this and begin to investigate it. What we're seeing today is the culmination of the last 15 years of this joint terrorism task force creation that we created after 9/11 coming to some positive fruition. The other thing to remember here is that not only did it start on Tuesday, but they're doing a pretty good job of keeping the details. So your question about whether it went off or didn't go off and why, we don't know what the timing and trigger device was for these explosives, but that is one of the 5 components. Apparently this was caught by X-ray technicians or people using backscatter machines, the thing you see at the airport. They look for wires, they look for explosives, they look for power devices, they look for triggers. And so clearly all those elements were there, or at least enough of them to make them concerned.
And Pierre Thomas, before we let you go, any significance from an investigative standpoint about the fact that all 6 of the people who were intended recipients here are prominent Democrats? We're talking about George Soros, we're talking about the Clintons, we're talking about the Obamas, Eric Holder, John Brennan, the former Obama national security official who now was actually addressed to CNN, even though he works at MSNBC, and Congresswoman Maxine Waters. These are all prominent Democrats. I'd also note they're all people that President Trump mentions pretty regularly on the campaign trail.
Well, all I can tell you now is that law enforcement officials are looking at it as a clue. It is a common denominator. It's a common factor. It is being looked at. It is being thought about. But they have a lot more work to do. So far, no word on any letters or any written document inside the packages that might speak to motive. So right now, what they have are packages with these devices, and now the hard work begins.
All right, Pierre, we'll let you get back to the beat. We appreciate your reporting throughout the day, and I know you're going to be back with more later today at World News Tonight. Tara Palmieri over at the White House. You broke the story earlier about one of the intended recipients here, Maxine Waters. We know her name from every Trump rally practically anywhere in the country over the last couple of months. And what are your sources telling you over at the White House about this incident, about the president's reaction, and about the investigation more broadly?
The president's being really careful about what he says about this. You know, his critics are saying all of these people who have been targeted are people that he targets at his rallies. You know, he's basically created Maxine Waters. She's a regular Democratic villain at his ruckus rallies. Same for Eric Holder, the Clintons, and you know, it's all of the people that President Trump has targeted that are now being targeted. So he's walking a very careful line. You heard him today saying that he's extremely upset, angry, and unhappy about this, that he takes the security of all Americans seriously. And, you know, they obviously realize they need to tread carefully with this. Some of my sources inside the White House pointed out that none of the bombs detonated. That may be, but I'm not sure that that's enough, you know, enough proof to distance themselves, but you know, that is something that they want to make sure is out there.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, and we're fortunate that that's the case.
I mean, the president was careful for about 2 minutes today after being pretty uncareful with his words for the last 2 years. And I think that's not lost on anyone. This is the president that talks about body slamming reporters and gets cheers from his crowd. This is the president who repeatedly has used references to gun violence and references to hit lists when talking about his political opponents. And so news like today is shocking and scary to people around the country.
Let's play what the president had to say about this just a short while ago.
In these times, we have to unify. We have to come together and send one very clear, strong, unmistakable message that acts or threats of political violence of any kind have no place in the United States of America.
And I was struck how similar that actually sounded from Hillary Clinton, who spoke earlier today on the campaign trail in Florida. Take a listen, guys.
It is a troubling time, isn't it? And it's a time of deep divisions, and we have to do everything we can to bring our country together.
Tom Bossert, you were at the White House when some bad national events happened. What's the thought process in terms of how the president casts his tone? Because Mary Alice is right. That's not the tone you hear from President Trump when he's out on the campaign trail. It's something different today and on other days of national tragedy.
Well, to me, I see it as him taking all sorts of political targets, right, in a rhetorical sense, and then separating them pretty clearly from actual targets of violence. So what he did today really was the right thing to call for unity. I want to see both sides, everybody do it. You know, we always talk about both sides of this thing. The rhetoric gets ugly on both sides politically, but nobody in this, from the targets to the law enforcement leaders all the way, including the President of the United States, want to see this turn into targets of violence. This is unacceptable.
And Tara Palmieri, before we let you go, the president's about to head out to Wisconsin, where he has a campaign rally tonight. It is still on, we are told. Any sense of what we might see from the president? It seems like if he takes his own advice here, it's going to be a much different speech than the one he's had on the campaign trail for the last months, years even.
Right, there was a lot of debate about if the president would even decide to rally tonight, considering there's been a real panic around the country. But he's decided to go through with it, and he's calling for a message of unity. But we'll hear if he has a softer tone on the campaign trail. My gut says he'll stick with the Trump show, and maybe he won't call out Democratic leaders by name like he normally does, but it's really hard to tell. It's almost become rote for him. We hear the same lines over and over and over again. So what is he going to fill that time up with? But yeah, you can hear from his voice. He realizes this is actually a national emergency at this point.
Thank you, Tara. What do you think, Tom Bossert? I mean, when these events happened, were you part of discussions that said this is not a time to play politics, or this is a time to be out there with a different statement? Maybe it would be a good idea, Mr. President, to cancel an event?
Absolutely. In fact, my job at the time and the people that are there advising him now is to tell him we don't know enough about motive right now. We don't know enough about who's involved in this plot. You need to make sure you measure your remarks, because your remarks are going to be played against the actions that play out over the coming weeks and months. And if any of these things happen, God forbid, to go off, or if the white powder turns out to be a real threat, the decontamination process can't be run on television next to him saying things that are, seemingly to invoke violence. So right now, be calm, keep your powder dry, help the investigators, and go out and make your political points without drawing attention to particular targets tonight.
All right, it could be a much different event.
And politically, I've been struck by two things that relate to this story while talking to voters around the country. Both sides of the aisle, we hear voters say that they're tired of the way that Washington works, that they're tired of this heated rhetoric, and they're really concerned about it. There's also been a huge uptick in concern over gun violence in general, and I've talked to tons of Republicans, even gun-owning Republicans, who say they are concerned about the level of violence in the country, and we're really reminded of that today, that this is also a voting issue. People are sick and tired of rhetoric that they think is out of control.
And we'll see. We'll stay tuned for what happens later tonight. Tom, I want your take also on a development, a new headline out of the Khashoggi murder. The Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia speaking today at that Davos in the Desert forum, addressing directly on camera for the first time this incident that originally they said wasn't an incident at all. They said Khashoggi left on his own, of course. That story morphed into what their current claim is, that this was the result of some kind of a tussle, some type of an argument, and resulted tragically in his death. Today, he did vow that the perpetrators would be brought to justice. He said there was a sense of mourning around the entire country for this. How does this advance the storyline from your perspective, Tom?
Well, on one hand, he seems like a kid caught with his hand in the cookie jar, right? Now the facts are dribbling out. He's denied it up front, but all of them are increasingly bad for him and make him look increasingly guilty. So I guess what he did today was further his notion that this was an attempted retrieval gone bad. This was just something that was a rendition that went awry. But until we can prove that he wasn't involved in this, I think that strains credibility.
What do you think, Mary Alice? Does this change anything? I mean, it seems like the president has been trying to find a way to believe MBS on this.
And try to find a way to have it not dramatically change the relationship with Saudi Arabia. And that's the tension between the president and Republicans on Capitol Hill, who said this is a moment that is worth changing the relationship.
Yeah, one more thing on that. It's not just the relationship between the United States and Saudi Arabia. It's the relationship between all of our other allies in Saudi Arabia. We've got the oil embargo, the real one from the Iran deal that the president backed out of, set to start on, I guess, in 8 days or so on November 4th. We've got that against the potential for the Saudis facing a real economic crisis here. The reason you saw MBS speak today is that his whole future economic plan depends on direct foreign investment from others, not just the United States. And nobody's looking to invest in a country and in a man who might be a murderer. So he can either sell oil or Mecca or get that direct foreign investment that's now drying up, and he's desperate. So the president's trying to hold together the region and the country, not just in the world, not just the United States relation.
And this, of course, was an investment conference. He's talking directly to people that want to do business with Saudi Arabia.
That's right.
We're going to turn around to the campaign trail a little bit. As we mentioned, President Trump will be in Wisconsin later today. We expect House Speaker Paul Ryan to join him there as the president engages on this series of stops. Last night was a big debate in Georgia, of course. The two candidates talking about the voter access, ballot access issue, among many, many others. But I want to start in our campaign Whiparound down in Florida. Chris Donato, our political reporter who was at the event with Hillary Clinton today, and Donna Shalala, who's running for Congress right outside Miami. Chris, an unexpected stir of news around all of this. What was Hillary Clinton's demeanor as this information came in? This was the first campaign stop we've seen for her in public in quite some time, and it came on quite a day.
Yeah, it was quite a day for Hillary Clinton. She looked, just as if nothing had happened, but she did address what happened right at the top of her remarks, saying she was thankful for the Secret Service for their service and their courage every day, and they intercepted what was a suspicious package before it got delivered to their house.
And how was she received in the room? She hasn't been out on the campaign trail very much. You get the sense that some Democrats have been tepid with the possibility of using her as a surrogate on the campaign trail.
Well, we haven't seen her really on the campaign trail, as you mentioned. She's been behind closed doors doing fundraisers. So this was really the first time we saw her in public campaigning. And she walked out and the crowd went wild. This is a district she won by nearly 20 points back in 2016, and the crowd loved her. They were on their feet cheering, clapping, and they really couldn't get enough of her.
And we should mention, Chris, before we let you go, that this is one of those districts that Democrats always thought they'd have in their column. You mentioned the 20-point advantage for Hillary 2 years ago, the fact that they have a Republican member of Congress retiring. This is a lot more competitive than Democrats hoped at this stage. Donna Shalala has struggled against a really pretty stellar Republican candidate.
Yeah, but Donna says she's confident she'll win because she has common sense. So, 13 days to go. I asked her what she thought she needed to tell the undecided voters because there are 13 days until Election Day. Early voting has already started. And she said, elect me because I have common sense.
All right, Chris Donato, thank you for being on the beat for us. Appreciate and glad you were down there with Hillary Clinton. I want to turn now to Kansas. This is an interesting state, guys, because obviously a very red state. There's a chance, though, that Democrats flip not just one, but 2 House seats in the state of Kansas. Our guy, Adam Kelsey, has been on the ground working it a little bit. Adam, what is the state of play in Kansas? What are voters telling you about these competitive House races?
Well, like you said, Rick, usually a red state during presidential years, but this is going to be something of a bellwether on election night. The most competitive race is where I am right now. I'm in Lawrence, Kansas. This is the 2nd congressional district, and our partners over at 538 are calling this one a toss-up, and it's really an interesting comparison between 2 different styles of candidates. On the Democratic side, Paul Davis is someone who's got a lot of name recognition. He was the Democratic nominee for governor back in 2014 against Sam Brownback. He was unsuccessful, but he came within about 3 points of defeating the incumbent Republican. And then on the Republican side in this congressional race, Steve Watkins, a first-time candidate, an Army veteran, somebody who's been dogged by a little bit of controversy over the course of the last couple of weeks. Some claims that he inflated his business resume after he left the military. So it's been interesting to see a more seasoned Democrat versus a first-time Republican. It's kind of flipping the script on what we've been seeing around the country.
We've seen also in Kansas a spotlight on health care. In the other competitive race, a lot of competing ads about who exactly is telling the truth, about who's going to protect people with pre-existing conditions, who's out there to protect some of the anti-pricing discrimination. Can you tell us, is that still playing out big on the ground? Are voters talking about it?
Yeah, it's absolutely the #1 issue. I caught up with Sharice Davids. She's the Democratic candidate in the 3rd congressional district over in Kansas City. And when I said to her, what are voters telling you? What's important to them here in Kansas? She didn't skip a beat. She said health care. So we've been hearing that, like you said, around the country, no different here in Kansas. And that 3rd congressional district, it's unique. It's like the one that Chris is in down in Florida because it's a Hillary Clinton district that re-elected their Republican congressperson, Kevin Yoder. You would expect Kevin Yoder to maybe moderate his views a little bit, come to the center, knowing that he's in a district that may be somewhat Donald Trump phobic. But what I've heard from experts and from officials here in Kansas that he hasn't done so. He's basically as conservative as ever, and he has been for the past 8 years. So it's been an opening for Democrats, and Sharice Davids, like I said, has a great chance of winning in that 3rd district.
All right, Adam Kelsey in Lawrence, Kansas. Rock chalk for us, Adam. We appreciate you joining, working the beat. Tom Boster, before we go, it does strike me that this is an interesting moment. The president has been talking a lot about the caravan. We talked about the messaging around health care. Real-world events have a tendency to cram out your plans. And this seems like a national moment right now Obviously, both sides are calling for unity in this moment. We know that these moments also dissipate. We saw it after the Capitol Police shooting. People were back to their partisan corners very, very quickly. How do you feel like the president is equipped to, and how can he balance the demands of campaigning over these next 13 days and the real demands of being president?
Yeah, well, I think the whole law and order message is something that he'll embrace. So I don't think he'll have to change his message on that. Hopefully this continues without a detonation and we don't have any loss of life. But on the border, he's going to keep pressing that. I don't think he's going to see any reason not to. I mean, at this point, for what it's worth, we don't have an apprehension problem. We have a return problem or a removal problem. So essentially, in 2000, 98% of the people that came across the border were Mexicans trying to come across. We can return them in a day or two or three. Now, over 50% of those that come across the border, caravan independent, are coming from Central America. It takes us a very long time when they look for asylum to return them, even if they qualify for return or removal. And so usually you can hold them for 20 days, but their asylum process takes 2 years. So a removal order is given to somebody in absentia. They're already gone and in the country. So the president's feeling frustrated. That differential between an open border political rhetoric and the actual mechanism of how that's carried out really has the same outcome, and so he loves to push that button. We can apprehend him, but we can't remove him. Same difference, so he's going to keep saying open border for any congressman that doesn't want to change that rule set. I don't think he sees any downside to that, so he'll continue doing that. In terms of being president, I think he's going to maintain the current schedule he does. A couple of rallies a week, do his day job during the day, and I think that's worked out for most presidents.
But as you know, Tom, he's not just saying that these are Hondurans that we can't remove. He's suggesting that these are criminals, a marauding army of people that are working their way up, even Middle Easterners, without any evidence, as he acknowledged.
Yeah, so he's relying on past statistical data there to project it onto the existing group that we don't have any insight into. But really, though, at the end of the day, it is that removal problem and not apprehension problem. And I think the voters are starting to understand that and understand the effect of the court's ruling. And so he's pushing in that little wedge.
And he's also saying that Democrats are for open borders. And while there have been a number of Democrats who've said that they would like to increase the number of refugees allowed into the country, potentially make it easier for some people that are fleeing violence to claim asylum status, it's a gross mischaracterization of the Democratic Party to say that they are for open borders.
Yeah, I mean, look, I've worked with a lot of them, and if you don't change the current system to account for the 2-year differential on removal and the 20-day block on how long you can detain somebody that comes across the border, especially with a child, you've got no choice but to conclude that a change or a willingness to passively accept the current outcome. I mean, the president's
People are
okay.
definitely in favor of large, sweeping immigration reform.
People say that, but I've yet to see it.
Yeah, we've yet to see it.
Tom Bossert, former Homeland Security official under President Trump and our ABC News contributor and colleague. Thank you, Tom.
Thank you.
Thank you to Mary Alice Parks. That's it from here. We'll keep it online all day long at abcnews.com. Until next time, I'm Rick Klein. Thanks for watching The Briefing Room.